Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and my name is Brian Greenspun, and I would like to, on behalf of my family and UNLV, welcome you to Greenspun Hall. I would also like to welcome you to this afternoon's UNLV Brookings Mountain West event, which is titled Reclaiming Prosperity, Repositioning Southern Nevada for the Next Economy. We are fortunate today to have one of the most knowledgeable people in the country, that's you, Bruce, to speak to us about the very issues that confront us and sometimes confound us as we try to plan our way into what should be the brightest of futures for Southern Nevada and the rest of the Intermountain West. My specific job today is to introduce UNLV's most dynamic president, Neil Smatrisk, who will introduce our speaker and the program. But before I do that, I wanted to take just a few minutes to tell you how we got here and why, as if most of you here don't already know, why this relationship among UNLV, the Lindsay Foundation, and Brookings is so important. For too many years, there have been people throughout our region calling for diversification, calling for a revamping of our taxing and revenue models, and calling for a fresh look at the engines of economic growth that should power us well into the 21st century. And for a myriad of reasons, the calls to action have been mostly unheeded, and we find ourselves in a place we never thought we'd be, trying to figure out where we go and how we get there. What has been missing throughout the years, in my opinion, has been the kind and quality of information which backs up the claims, points the way forward, and helps us secure citizen support for the kinds of decisions that we have refused to make during the first half century of modern Las Vegas. With Lindsay's help and some incredible foresight, Brookings was able to establish the Mountain West Initiative at UNLV, which brings that superb quality of thought to a process which now, far more than ever before, demands action and requires that it be done with as few mistakes as possible. Linking Brookings to UNLV has been one of my goals for over 10 years. I just didn't know how to do it, nor did I know the partners who could understand the import of such a partnership. The man I'm about to introduce got it the very first time he heard it from Ron Smith and others, and the rest, or should I say this great beginning, is one for the history books. Already, Brookings Scholarship, together with its academic counterparts at UNLV, has been making a difference in the kind and quality of our discourse. Rob Lang and Mark Muro have been major factors in this early success, and we are playing key roles in this they are playing key roles in this growing relationship. You will understand shortly, when you hear our guest and the excellent responders who have agreed to be here, how this collaboration can, will, and should work. So now it is my pleasure to introduce the man who has led the way toward a future that he sees very clearly, while the rest of us are in the middle of this haze that clouds the vision, and the person who makes our dreams for UNLV, for our community, and for our region that much more real because of his ability to lead us toward them. When those history books are written about the next 20 years in Las Vegas, if we are successful, they will credit this man's tireless leadership. I am honored to introduce the president of UNLV, Neil Smatrisk.
That was really nice. Yeah. I found myself feeling better just listening. And I think that maybe brings us to part of the point of the day, the challenge and the promise. I think many of you are aware of the situation we're facing now. It's not an easy one. I want to say there's folks in the room who I know spend virtually every waking hour mulling over these problems. Chancellor Dan Klaich of the Nevada State Higher Ed System, Regent Kevin Page, I just wanted to make sure people knew who you were, not so they could throw things, but so they could help all of us collectively find our way. People ask, how's it going? And I say, well, every day I feel like I live somewhere in the chasm between hope and despair. And that's a strange chasm to straddle. And really, if you take a look at the times for our region, it's easy to understand, isn't it? This has been an incredible city. And what drew me here, and so many of you here, is the dynamism and promise, the fundamental belief in the American dream, and the idea that we could do anything here in this city. And what has happened up until now has been nothing short of amazing. Nothing short of amazing. And now we've hit a bump, pretty serious bump in the road. And it's knocked the wind out of us. And we need to recover our breath and regain some momentum. But whenever you hit a bump in the road, you have an opportunity to pull back a bit and take a look. Halt the headlong rush forward and ask, are we going in the right directions? Are we doing the right things? Are we adding value to the community? Do we make a difference? And of course, at UNLV, you all know we're being challenged with that now. We're losing structure. We've lost nearly a third of our budget in the past 3 years. We are certainly, according to the Chronicle of Education, the sharp end of the university budget cutting stick on a national level. And so if anybody's challenged to ask, what is it we were doing right and what is it we were doing wrong and how can we make a difference still, when I think we all believe the time is more important than ever, now's the time to have that conversation. And we have been fortunate because today's program is about how great universities and great places can use bad times to get better. And that is critical. And so I ask you to embrace today's discussion in that spirit. It's easy to talk about what we can't do. And in fact, it's easy right now to talk about the things we might not be able to do going forward. But what I think we need to focus on is what we have to do to be better. Several years ago, we redefined a strategic plan, and that plan was really interesting. Okay, strategic plans, you can all roll your eyes. How many of you want to be in a strategic planning exercise? I'll say it's important because 2 weeks from now we face our decanal accreditation visit, and what a perfect time it is for that. But our strategic plan, despite the fact that there were many ornaments hung on the tree, our strategic plan was pretty solid because it said something that we all really deeply believe in here at UNLV. It said, we are part of this city. We are proud of it. We will embrace our Las Vegasness. And by doing that, as opposed to trying to chart a course for being Harvard in the desert, we think we'll add value. And maybe if we add value, people will care. And if people care, then there's hope. And so, as we were writing down what we thought we could do, we recognized that this city needed a lot of help, but that the problems and challenges this city faced weren't unique to Las Vegas. They were, in fact, global issues. And then we read a report authored by Rob Lang and Mark Miro. You'll hear those names on more than one occasion today, called Megacities of the Intermountain West. And the Mountain Megas report, which was a view of our Intermountain region and Las Vegas through the lens of the Brookings Institution Metro program. Said, you know, there's some basics. In the words of Brookings, if you're going to have a sustainable city, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have productive growth, you're going to have inclusive growth, and you're going to have sustainable growth. You're going to need to focus on human capital, economic development, and your infrastructure. And that you don't work on just one of these at a time. They have to build on each other, and you create a more prosperous and sustainable future. And you create a happy middle class. You create a region that can continue to do the kinds of things we all came here in hopes of being able to do, that offers our families and our children hope. And so, following the Brookings model, we would like to think that UNLV has become the perfect Brookings partner. And I think the fact that you're here, that the Metro program is here, that Brookings is represented, is a realization that we had a lot to gain together. Now, I haven't yet introduced our speaker, and that's because there are a few things that I can say that really match the accomplishments of Bruce Katz. I've made it clear, I think, that UNLV has embraced the Metro vision. The right question is, where did the Metro vision come from? Who created it? Why is it important to the country? Why is it important to Brookings? And I think the simple answers are that someone who was a visionary, someone who understood the nature of urban areas and metropolitan programs, had to make sure that those regions had a voice on a national policy level. And so today, you're going to get to hear clearly the case for metro programs from the visionary who created the metro program, a founding vice president for the Brookings Institution and the director of the Brookings Metro program, Bruce Katz. Now, Bruce, I know you hate introductions, and it hurts my ears to hear introductions of me, except for the one Brian gave, which I have recorded. But Bruce has worn many hats in his life. He's come up through HUD. He's worked with the Senate on housing and urban development issues, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Senate Subcommittee on Housing and Urban Affairs. He's actually, in the somewhat distant past, a lawyer out of Yale, as is the dean of our law school. So he comes from good roots. But what Bruce has done is he's added what I would call a potent effector limb to the Brookings Institution. Not just policy and analysis, but he is a change leader. And through the activities of the Metro program, he's helped to guide and evolve a number of metro regions, serving them so that they could get better, helping them to be cogent and organized. And our job is really simple. We bought in to that vision. And by buying into that vision, I believe we've gained a toehold in this region for sensible thought that will help form a good future for this city. And so he's a visionary, he's an architect, he's someone who's helping us in other metro areas understand ourselves before we even knew we were in trouble. He'd been there, helping other metro programs, and long before we had to address the tough issues that we face today. So, quite simply, Bruce, I am thrilled and delighted you're here, and I'll say this to all of you. Now is the time for the message you're going to hear. Las Vegas is the place it needs to be heard, and I can't think of a better person in the world to deliver that message than Bruce Katz.
You know, originally, I was hoping to bring my 13-year-old daughter this week because I thought this was her week off from school. She would have liked that introduction because the other day she asked me, you know, I'm not quite sure what you do for a living, Dad. Maybe this would have helped. First of all, thank you for that introduction. You are so right that bad times are good times for innovation and reform. If you go back in American history and you look at those periods where the country was able to propel itself forward, it's during the crisis moments. And I think that's what's going to happen now. And also, just thank you for your inspiring leadership in difficult times. We've got two Brookings trustees here today. First, I just want to thank Brian and Myra for being here because your pride in this city and this region and this state is infectious, and you've infected Brookings. We should, at some point, have a streaming video of a Brookings board meeting so you see what Brian does back in Washington. He is one of your biggest advocates. But we also have John Wilhelm here. And John, as many of the folks here I'm sure know, is with the hospitality industry, Unite here, and he has brought the voice of labor into the Brookings Leadership Council and has had an enormous impact, both pre-recession and even more so now as we deal with the pain of this downturn. Last set of thanks to the Lindsay Foundation. Lindy and Jeff, your vision, your resources have allowed Mark Miro and Rob Lang to do the work that they're doing. Not just to have an impact here, but to really, as Neil was saying, have this city, this metropolis, this state become part of a broader network of partners. Because this is really about a metro nation really asserting its power and asserting its primacy, and you've allowed that to happen. So it's an honor to be here in Brookings Mountain West. As you all know, it works, amazing. As you all know, this is when I really need my 13-year-old here, as you all know in this room. As you all know, the recession has been a wake-up call for this country. We think it has revealed an economy out of whack that was fixated with consumption, that was wasteful in its use of energy, that frankly was more adept at increasing inequity rather than sharing prosperity, and was very, very successful at exacerbating rather than easing divisions between Wall Street and Main Street. So it's time to get back on track here in the state, in this region of this country, at the national scale for a radically different kind of growth. And so I'm going to make the following proposition. First, the shape of the next economy must be export-oriented, low-carbon, and innovation-fueled. This is a vision where we export more, we waste less, we innovate in what matters, we produce and deploy more of what we invent. And that's the kind of productive and sustainable economy we need to build from the rubble of this recession. Second, Southern Nevada can play in the next economy, but it's going to require some hard choices, and it's require a deliberate decision to move beyond an economy fueled by debt and fueled by real estate consumption. Las Vegas has an important export strength. Yes, you do export in its convening sector. Strong international connections, solar and geothermal energy sources, and a growing set of efforts in renewable energy production. And these strengths are augmented by your proximity to Southern California. And finally, you'll see the lawyerly linearity here. This is what I learned out of law school. To build the next economy, the U.S. must connect the macro vision to metro reality, the macro to the metro. We need to leverage at the national scale the market energy and creativity found in metros like this one, with the kind of smart, game-changing federal and state actions. And we need a full court press on delivering an educated and skilled workforce which can drive the next economy and must benefit. The next economy must be opportunity rich as well as export-oriented, low-carbon, and innovation-fueled. We know this is not going to be easy. We compete in a fiercely competitive world where established nations like Germany and rising nations like China, India, and Brazil are making transformative investments and moving forward. They are doing what it takes in renewable energy, in modern ports, in high-speed rail, in metropolitan transit to compete with us. And America, we seem stuck in some kind of political polarization and hyper-partisanship in both the federal government and, as you know well, the state governments. Now, our challenge, your challenge, is to convert the dynamism in this metropolis into solutions that are pragmatic, far-reaching, and critical to this moment. We must move to change the mental map from the nation from only being a constitutional union of 50 states to an economic network of nimble, highly connected, globally integrated metropolitan areas. So let me start by offering a vision for the next American economy, one that's export-oriented, low-carbon, innovation fuel. Let's first imagine an economy where more firms in more sectors trade more goods and services seamlessly with the world, particularly with the nations that are rapidly urbanizing and industrializing. As President Obama said in the State of the Union, the more products we make and sell to other countries, the more jobs we support right here in America. Well, this will require a major change in direction. For the past several decades, the U.S. economy has been driven by imports rather than fueled by exports. According to the World Bank, exports make up only 11% of the GDP of the U.S., compared to 40% in China, 36% in Canada, and you see the figures for India, for Europe, for Japan. As Howard Rosen of the Peterson Institute recently summarized, exporting is almost an unnatural act in the United States. Only 4% of the U.S. companies export, and less than 0.5% of U.S. companies operate in more than one country. So can we get back into the export game? The answer is decidedly yes. For the first time in recorded history, more than half of the world's population lives in urban and metropolitan areas. By 2030, that share will rise to 60%. Across the globe, metro economies are driving demand for increased trade and commerce, only temporarily abated by this downturn. The U.S. can play in this expansion. We still manufacture a range of advanced goods, whether it's aircraft or spacecraft or electrical machinery or precision surgical instruments or high-quality pharmaceutical products. And we already have a trade surplus in services, $144 billion in 2008, and we're poised for a quantum leap in the export of high-value services. Exports to China, management, consulting, public relations increased by 38-fold, 6 years alone. Our exports to India in construction, architectural, engineering services increased 41-fold over the same period. America's potential for exports and this region's potential for exports is hidden in plain sight. President Obama's challenge to double exports in 5 years is exactly the kind of ambitious, far-reaching goal we need at this moment to transition to a productive and sustainable economy. That leads to the second point. Low carbon is the second hallmark of the next economy. America can not only lead the global transition to sustainable growth, but we have to use the breakthroughs in technology and practice to spark a renewable energy manufacturing revolution in Nevada and other Intermountain West states. We have a ways to go. The U.S. has been slow to embrace the potential of the green economy, despite having twice the per capita carbon dioxide emissions of other industrialized nations. And despite its renewable energy potential, this state still gets 50% of its electric power from coal, the same share as the nation. We all know China is seeking to dominate the race to green, dedicating $221 billion of their recent stimulus package on renewable energy and other green investments compared to less than $100 billion in the United States. Make no mistake, this is not just about the climate or the science of climate change. It's not just about the technocracy of cap and trade. This is about markets. Everything is about to change. The energy we use is going to migrate. from an almost exclusive focus on carbon-based fuels to a more sustainable mix, whether it's solar or wind or hydro or geothermal, ocean waves, bio, even nuclear. The infrastructure we build is going to shift from 20th century models of transport and energy to rapid bus, ubiquitous broadband, congestion pricing, smart grid, distributed power, high-speed rail, intelligent transport. The products we buy are going to move from high carbon gas guzzlers and fluorescent lights to sustainable goods, electric vehicles for sure, energy efficient appliances, smart meters, LED lights, organic food. And the homes we live in and the buildings, schools, office, retail we frequent will be more sustainable in design, more efficient in their use of water and energy, and better arrayed so that people can spend less, walk more, and have a higher quality of life. So if we need job creation in this country, and we've lost 8 million jobs in this recession, here's the way to do it. Financiers to finance, scientists and engineers to invent, entrepreneurs to take to market, laborers to build and install new infrastructure, facilities, and products. Now that leads to the final piece of the next economy, which is innovation. That's the historic catalyst and fuel for economic growth. We've got to be the world's innovation nation, not just a hothouse of ideas and invention, but the platform for advanced production. We've done it before. Innovation has been the driver of American productivity and growth. All you have to do is look at the past 30 years. The innovation in computer and telecommunication enabled the information revolution. I was just looking at my BlackBerry before, 300,000 iPads sold in one day. And of course, my daughter went there yesterday and tried to get me to buy one, but I said no. Gotta wait, the price will come down. American leadership or an R&D investment and key indicators of science innovation is slipping. And more generally, and this is a critical issue that I'll come back to for y'all, the next American workforce is ill-equipped to drive innovation. African Americans and Hispanics lag on critical indicators, and they will constitute nearly 40% of our workforce within the next several decades. Finally, we lag on the conversion of innovation to homegrown production. We used to run a trade surplus in advanced technology products in the mid-1990s. Now we have a deficit. If we don't produce more, we will innovate less. So it's time to rediscover our innovation mojo in our research labs, on our factory floors, in the tradable sectors that drive wealth creation and sustainable growth. So that leads to my second proposition. This metropolis has strengths, some long-standing, some nascent, that can help it play in the next economy. Now in exports, this is no surprise. You're starting from a weak position. You rank 84th among the top 100 metros in export intensity, with just about 8.4% of your gross metro product coming from exports. The average in the top 100 metros is about 11.2%. Now the exports you do have are concentrated in services, particularly in convening and related services designated as a travel service. But growth in service exports, which outpaced economic growth between 2003 and 2008, was driven by a diversifying set of professional services, financial, management, consulting services, in addition to travel. You are unique. You built an iconic metro area of nearly 2 million people through gaming, as well as entertainment, dining, and shopping. Your proven ability to reinvent and sell this place will be critical for the export economy. City Center is an example. It represents just the latest morphing of a once low-end motel room town to a major global metro that attracts higher-end travelers from around the world to a cosmopolitan, dynamic urban experience. With the Consumer Electronics Show becoming a permanent fixture here, Vegas will emerge as a standing deal mart in a huge industry. To become the truly international metropolis that this place can be, you must go beyond gaming and consumption-focused routes to develop complementary specializations, in particular professional services, in information science, in health sciences, and in selected sustainability technologies. That's going to require modern and efficient connectivity with regional metros and countries around the world. McCarran Airport's a critical asset in that respect. It's the 7th busiest airport in the nation. It serves one of the most heavily traveled short-haul air corridors in America between here and Los Angeles. And maybe most importantly, it has been indispensable in raising your global profile, seeing a 21-fold increase in international flight arrivals since 1990. But your regional road and rail connections are weak. As Mark and Rob have noticed before, Vegas and Phoenix remain the nation's two largest metro areas, not connected with an interstate highway. I-15, the crucial link with LA, provides just 2 lanes in critical areas. And you lack intercity rail lines that are critical to move people and freight, as well as to provide transportation options and reduce the pressure on McCarran. Clearly achieving a significant, relatively high-speed rail connection to the California mega economy must remain a top priority for the region. Now, in low carbon, you're well positioned due to geography and often enlightened state policy. Nevada was one of the first states to adopt a renewable portfolio standard for power generation in '97. Strengthened standards adopted last year require 25% of the state's electricity to come from renewable sources by 2025, up from 10% now. Your incredible geographic assets give you a head start. Plentiful sunlight, geothermal resources have made this the second largest state in production of both geothermal and solar energy, behind California, as illustrated with early investments in geothermal power and the world-class solar facility at the nearby Air Force Base. So fully realizing your potential in this sector requires modernizing your electric grid and expanding beyond generating power into new areas in clean energy. And the recent announcement that we read about of the wind turbine facility shows promise for a new manufacturing foothold for this region, a shift from services to production. That will provide as many 1,000 jobs and will meet increasing demand for wind turbines throughout North and South America. Now, in innovation, again, not a surprise. You don't fare well by traditional measures. The Metro records only 2.1 patents per 10,000 employees, compared to about 7.1 for the top 100 metros. The share of employment in R&D is less than a third of the top 100 metro average, with just 13 of every 10,000 workers doing R&D, compared to 43 per 10,000 for the nation's large metros. But again, your unique location gives you unique positioning. Regular weather and lack of natural disasters make you an ideal location for state-of-the-art data centers, which must have uninterrupted connections around the country and the world. Because Enron, remember Enron? Wanted to concentrate massive broadband connectivity near California, but in a safe place, the region now boasts one of the biggest, fastest, best connected data processing facilities in the world, the SuperNAP data center at Switch Communications, which is now becoming a magnet for Fortune 500 companies, information back office, and potentially higher-end design and engineering. Now, this new specialty, as well as the gaming sector, could be the basis for innovative growth in fields like cloud computing, high-tech design, high-end back office space, electronic games, advanced security. And Vegas has the capacity to find a foothold in growing innovative sectors, as shown with the Cleveland Clinic's $70 million partnership with the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health, which opened last July, which could be the beginning of a broader relationship between this metropolis and that world-class hospital. So that leads to my final proposition. To build this next economy at scale, because this only happens once every several generations, that an economy as large as the American economy goes through the transition we're about to go through. To do this at scale, we must connect the macro vision to metro reality. We're not China, thankfully, right? We're not a planned economy. We don't have a bunch of bureaucrats sitting in our nation's capital, no matter what some think, deciding which sectors should grow in which places, and then aligning infrastructure, innovation, human capital, and other investments to make that happen. To build the next economy, the U.S. needs a playbook that is aligned to our entrepreneurial nation and its regions, where quality growth and jobs emerge from the natural DNA of Metro America, private firms, research institutions, regional industry networks, universities and community colleges like UNLV, government trade associations, philanthropy like Lindsay, labor. The federal and state governments must, of course, lead where they must, given the need for common markets and transformative investment. But networks of metro leaders, and this is what's not really well understood yet in Washington, D.C., metros must innovate where they should, given their distinct clusters and competitive advantages and the responsibilities they have, you have, for developing quality place and educating the next workforce. So what does that look like in practice? Let's just start with exports for a second. The president's challenge is to double exports by 2015. And we all know the macro levers for export growth, trade, currency. Those actions alone won't do the trick because exports to some extent begin at home. So anyone who travels within or among our major metros knows that we're a first-class economy with a third-class infrastructure that is literally stuck in traffic. We need a national infrastructure bank. We see this in Australia, we see this in Europe, to invest in regionally and nationally significant high-value projects for the future. Intermodal facilities as our ports, as they're doing in China, high-speed rail as in Germany and France, consumption pricing as in the UK, the electricity grid as in Ireland. This would have critical import for this region of the country, which is still going to grow substantially in the coming decades. The U.S. population is about 310 million. We'll be 400 million by mid-century. And a lot of that growth will be here. Imagine the stresses and strains on your existing infrastructure. Now, we've identified some busy corridors in this part of the country that are critical links in the nation's air systems and good candidates for investments to fulfill the nation's commitment to high-speed rail, such as the triangulation between Metro Vegas, Phoenix, and LA. Yet the federal government alone is not going to deliver an export economy. In a global economy, the heavy lifting is going to be done at this scale because you concentrate the large companies, the small and medium-sized enterprises, the research institutions, specialized services, skills providers, et cetera. The region working with the state needs to systematically go about building a more diversified portfolio of competitive, distinctive export sectors, not invented whole cloth, but deriving by exporting key high-value activities adjacent to your current enterprise. They might be the higher value convening and associated professional services that Rob talks about. I mean, we were together, a couple of years ago, where you talked about what happens in this town at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at a major trade mart. Doesn't just change the region, it changes the world. This is where deals are done. And there's ways of building on that natural strength that can sort of bring you up the ladder. There are other pieces, as I've talked about before, in terms of this really interesting position, given your weather, given your proximity to the Southern California market for data, for high-end processing capacity. So you need to bring the same kind of focus to building this high road economy over the next several decades that was done to build this iconic world-class tourism hub. So those are the steps to take on exports. Let's just talk about carbon for a second. Obviously, at the national scale, we need to set a price on carbon. We can do it through a tax, we could do it with cap and trade, we could do it cap and dividend. We need to set a price on carbon. Beyond that, we need to invest in advanced research and development. We're recommending a network of energy discovery and innovation institutes. The administration has embraced much of this. They call it energy innovation hubs. The idea is to be the country that literally cracks the code, whether it's solar, whether it's nuclear, whether it's materials science, smart grid modeling, geothermal, carbon sequestration, biofuels. And the key here is not to put a lab off somewhere in the desert. I mean, we did that during the Second World War, but that was disconnected from the marketplace. The key here, the new thinking, is about open innovation. Universities and research institutes embedded in the market with entrepreneurs, with companies, with VC investors, with labor, with skills provider, right? With capital access, with marketing and branding. That's the potential of this area given your unique physical position. And perhaps UNLV can be one of the mainstay advanced energy research institutions in the country, particularly on solar, given the burgeoning industry. Now that's going to take some change at the national scale. We've seen a reduction in non-defense energy-related R&D from about $5.4 billion a year in 1980, from $8 billion to $5.4 billion. That's a 33% decrease from 1980 in real dollars. That's an 80% decrease when taken as a share of GDP. What Mark and others have advocated is we go up to about $20 billion a year and sustain that investment at the national scale, not just to fund scientists and engineers to do things in the abstract, but to fund real production, real deployment, real quality jobs. Now here again, federal interventions are not enough. Metros own the quality of their place. The federal government is not going to tell you how to build and reinvent this place. And most of America basically has developed in fairly low-dense, distended ways. All places in the United States have the ability to build a different landscape, to move literally from an autoscape to a landscape, to give people more choices in transport and housing and how they literally get around. Now, some of the mountain metros are already on the case. Denver, as you know, has made significant investments in light rail and rapid bus, and it's concentrating development around mixed-use stations. Salt Lake and Phoenix have also recently opened up light rail lines, and your brand new bus rapid transit system is absolutely a step in the right direction. So changing how places grow will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They could create US-grown industries for streetcars, light rail transit, rapid buses. There is absolutely no reason why the United States needs to go abroad to buy these things. We need to make them here. Finally, what about innovation? We need a national innovation policy. We have not had one. What we have is innovation activities scattered throughout the government and divorced, unlike in Germany and China, from manufacturing and exports, and little focus on what individual metros do. So you can tailor innovation to the distinct competitive advantages. We look to Korea, we look to Finland, we propose a National Innovation Foundation. Bring under one roof all these fragmented efforts to boost commercial innovations and put it in one place. 2 + 2 = 5. If you can really marry up the genius of our current efforts and again relate it to commercialization of ideas and production and deployment of ideas in the United States. Now at the metro scale, what you then do is build your high-level clusters. Whether it's health sciences, whether it's computing, whether it's clean tech, strengthen your existing centers of innovation. Again, bad times could be good times for reform and innovation. And bad times are places for states, cities, and metros to declare these are the things we must invest in. If you want to build for the future, you must invest in infrastructure. If you want to build for the future, you must invest in higher ed and community college. This is not just about educating the next generation of workers. It's also about being a hub of regional innovation and a hub of regional growth. It's not just about high-profile institutions. Local community colleges, post-secondary technical skills providers will deliver the bulk of the next American workforce. Tomorrow, with John's help, I'm going to visit the Culinary Local 226's Culinary Training Academy, which is literally at the cutting edge of workforce training here in Vegas. And an innovative economy, frankly, can only be built if we have the educated and skilled workers to build it. So all these agendas are ways to move towards a more export-oriented, lower carbon, innovation-driven future. But that's not enough. We've been through several decades where, in theory, we had growth, yet incomes became more polarized in the United States. We're about to put a report out in a couple of weeks called The State of Metropolitan America. What we found in the top 100 metros is wages for low-income families in this decade fell by 8%. For middle-class workers, they fell by 4%. And for high-income workers, they went up by 3%. Now, your metro is hobbled in many respects by, and this is not a surprise, by disturbingly low education attainment rates and dramatic inequality. So the last piece of this puzzle, which in some ways may even supersede much of what I've described, is an all hands on deck, federal, state, local push, public, private, corporate, civic, on human capital development in this city, in this metropolis, in this state. You know, Washington is beginning to send signals that urban education in challenge areas should be accompanied by systemic reform. That's a smart way to proceed. That's the race to the top fund. Beyond that, the president's call for an American graduation initiative, $12 billion investment over 10 years to double the number of community college graduates. That's a critical priority, even at a time of constrained resources. But, you know, the feds don't finance education and higher education. The state does. And ultimately, localities, cities and counties do. So what we need to discuss is a different state attitude towards education at all levels, and a move towards finance reform that both honors the region's desire for lean government, perfectly understandable, yet ensures the state achieves a sustainable, adequate finance system for essentials such as top caliber education. Let me end where I began. The Great Recession has set the conditions for the kind of historic national reset that we witness once or twice a century. In this region, in the country as a whole, we need to get about the business of restructuring, rebalancing our economy towards exports, towards innovating in what matters, towards low carbon, sustainable growth, towards opportunity. Now, this requires a new playbook, and it's a radically different vision for federal and state leadership and metro innovation. At the federal and state level, we need to find new, smaller, leaner, more entrepreneurial entities that can leverage up private sector finance, that can leverage up innovative growth, entrepreneurial growth. We are up against a different kind of competitor in China. We can't basically just operate by the rules from the 1970s, given this. At the metro scale, we need a 21st century vision of networks of leaders in metros, not just government, but private, labor, right, civic, university, environmental, that working together can do what it takes to take their assets, their attributes, and leverage them up, hopefully armed with new federal resources. Here's the bottom line. We need innovators in this metro and in metros like you around the country to come together and assert your energy and power in doing what's necessary to take this country forward. You understand the global competition, frankly, better than most of our political leaders in Washington. And because you're located at the ground level, you understand the power of clusters and connections, of livability and smart transport, of schools and skills. You're the pragmatic voice in America. You're the innovative voice in America. You're the entrepreneurial voice in America. We are a metro nation, and it is high time to start acting like one. Thank you very much. Neil, tell me if I have a few minutes for questions. Or
I would certainly suspect you do, and then I think we're not too far off schedule. We'll have time for panel two.
Okay. I can't see a thing except for the light. The light, it burns, but but if there are questions, raise your hand and I'll try to see them, or else someone will tell me.
We'll spot them.
Oh, okay.
Over here for you. I see Michael.
But yeah. Oh, great.
How do you envision, for those of us in the room and beyond, that we raise the level of awareness to the higher education system in this state to get more money and more energy into that higher education program?
That's a good question. I think it would be helpful to your state to have the discourse around higher education and its new role in national competitiveness raised. We're really not talking about the university sector from 20 years ago. This is a different game we're playing. And I have to say that when you think about the assets and attributes of the country versus our competitors abroad, whether they're in Europe, whether they're in Asia, whether they're in Latin America, one of the biggest assets and attributes we have, A, is this network of advanced research institutions we've built around the country who have moved way beyond their education role and are really now embedded in their regional economies. And B, this potential for technology transfer, this potential for, and frankly the Germans do this already, but perhaps we can do it better, for taking research and innovation and having it work hand in glove with the private sector, given the clusters and strengths of a particular metro, so that again you can leverage it up and you can basically build from the entrepreneurial genius of the private sector, but in a very precise, very granular way. Neil and I were talking before. I think this pivot that you have here of saying, you know, we're not going to be Harvard in the sand. We're going to be a top-level regional university embedded in our region, cognizant of what we do, connected to corporate, civic, labor, political, and environmental leaders. That's brilliance. And frankly, the more places that do that in the United States, supported and undergirded by their federal and state governments, the more kind of productive and sustainable growth we can have. So I can't see if there's a question or is that,
Hi,
okay.
My name's Tina Past. I've been here a long time, and the Lead Institute for Real Estate Studies here at the university has hosted annual roundtables that have done white papers on this subject many times, and many of you in the room have participated. But we always hit a wall at the end, which is, we know what we need to do, we just can't seem to figure out how. And I'm curious because we have a unique government structure here of municipalities and a county that is a city that isn't a county. But we don't seem to have a regional entity that can have authority. It only has responsibility. Any suggestions on other metro areas that have maybe gotten a little further along in the effort and gotten past where we get stuck, and what does it look like and how it's structured, please?
I think that's a great question, and I think at the end of the day, because the U.S. is such a diverse country in terms of its governance systems, if you want to see fragmentation, we should all get on a plane and fly to Chicago tonight. 464 municipalities in the metropolis, but what they have is a Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, where Mayor Daley, small city of 3 million, sits with suburban mayors on a constant and recurrent basis to sort of wrestle with the main metropolitan issues facing that region. Now, the real issue here is not the perfect government form. The real issue here is for corporate, civic, political, environmental, university, and labor leaders to realize the competition is outside. It's not inside the metropolis. What has to happen in Metroland is we collaborate to compete rather than compete against each other. If we do that, we can unleash an enormous potential for growth and innovation in this country. So we have to move beyond the little box governments. And frankly, from an outsider's perspective who does a lot of work in the Northeast and the Midwest, you're less fragmented than most other parts of the country. So there's even less of an excuse to have these kind of intramural divisions. So the narrative has to become, let's collaborate to compete as opposed to compete against each other. And then there are 15 or 20 or 25 examples in the United States, and then you all just have to decide which one works the best for you. One last question, and then, okay, and then I'm going to give it to Rob.
Thank you, sir. I'm Vince Fodera. Everybody in this room has seen one of my inventions. I was the first one to invent, develop, and present motorized shopping carts to grocery stores. Okay, I have a United States patent, also issued for something else. But I have a product right here. I'm on the internet that will provide many jobs, industrial jobs, factory jobs for a low-tech energy electricity generator that could be built small for individual homes or sizable for a community. It will convert, of course, wind energy on a different module than the propeller blade equivalent. This is one of the things I can give that up to anybody, give it to you, and I just need someone to look at what I'm offering.
Well,
Innovation
Yeah,
is fine because it's simple. And everything you say, you vindicated me because I've been talking about this for 15 years to many people.
Right.
Primarily about Las Vegas. I'm a long-time resident here. Thank you, sir.
Well, first of all, I did not pay him to stand up and say that. But you are the personification of the innovation nation. I mean, this is what really sets the United States apart from most of our competitors, is we're entrepreneurial, we're open, we are one very, very, very large common market. Just look to Europe and the problems with Greece and Portugal and Italy. The European Union's got their own issues. This is what's going to move us forward. So to go back to the prior issue and the prior question, we have to unleash this in the United States. We have to stop the internal focus on divisions and polarization. And we have to get about the business of making the 21st century the second American century, as opposed to ceding our position to China or anyone else. With that, I think I'll hand it back to Rob because I want to listen to the panel. Thanks.